Hi, everybody, and welcome to Chapter 3 in Criminal Justice Organization and Administration. And in Chapter 3, we're going to be talking about communication because communication is central to any sort of law enforcement agency. So, effective communication is imperative, right? And we're going to talk about some very basic things with communication, and we're also going to talk about very organizationally specific concepts. But we're going to start with the basic. And the first is understand others first, and then seek to have them understand you. Think before you speak, okay? Especially as officers, especially with all of the cell phone, video camera recordings that exist anywhere and everywhere. You want to think before you speak, and you want to be positive, not negative, because in this case, the whole world can be watching, especially if something goes viral. And remember that words are meant to inform and transform. So choose them wisely. Be very specific about how you speak. Listening is of the utmost importance. That sounds really basic, but you wouldn't believe how many people are terrible listeners. Too many people are busy preparing what they want to say in response to somebody while that person is speaking, and therefore you're not actually hearing what they're saying, and that is where communication is going to fail. And keep in mind, we don't just communicate verbally, we communicate with body language, we communicate with tone of voice, facial expressions, hand gestures, etc. So, what are some of the consequences of poor communication? Well, if there's poor communication from the police, then people don't know what to expect from the police, and people don't know how to behave in response to the police. So, poor communication can have huge negative consequences. The example I'm going to use here is more extreme, and it's all the way down to the use of deadly force. If an organization doesn't have clear communication on their use of force policy, when, how, and under what circumstances use of force may be utilized by law enforcement, well, if you have that communication breakdown, you're gonna have officers inappropriately using use of force. So that's just one example of where a communication breakdown could be of really big consequence. Also, when communication doesn't land, and this is true in any context, that can often result in tension and resentment and frustration because the sender of the message is thinking, well, I already discussed this, I already communicated this to you. Why aren't you getting it? And the receiver's like, but I didn't really get that out of what you said, so now you're upset with me. And there can be just a lot of conflicts that result. So there are three parts to communication. There's the message, the sender, and the receiver. This seems like a simple process. It's just got three elements, but it breaks down constantly, as any intimate or personal relationship will demonstrate with you. But there are some ways that we can refine the process to make sure the communication doesn't fail. So we're going to talk about things that you should not do when you are communicating. The first is avoid the use of jargon. And jargon is the specialized language in the field that lay people are simply not going to know. So law enforcement has a lot of jargon, right, that they use in communication with one another. But remember, you're engaging with the community on a regular basis. And if you use that jargon with lay people, they're not going to know what you're saying. So I use the example of the term magnetometer is very common in law enforcement, in court agencies or courthouses and so forth. Can you please step through the magnetometer, ma'am or sir? Most people are going to look at you and step through the what? They know it as, can you please walk through the x-ray device, right? So you want to be careful where you use jargon so that your message actually lands. You want to avoid redundancy, keep things straight, simple, and direct, right? So, you want to say this occurred in February, not this occurred in the month of February. You want to avoid superfluous elements to your communication. Avoid ambiguity or fancy, confusing words. People will rarely tell you if they don't understand what you're saying, whether it's in a social setting or professional setting. So instead of saying something like crime is ubiquitous, well, nobody is going to raise their hand and say, I don't know what ubiquitous means, right? It's much simpler to just say, there's a lot of crime in this area, right? It means the same thing, and the second one actually gets your message to land. Avoid the use of abstract words that are theoretical, words that are inspecific. So, for example, this department has policy against long hair. Well, okay. What's long hair? Is long hair that falls below the collar, or is long hair that falls below the shoulders? So if you want your message to land, you want to be very specific. In previous decades, communication through email and text message has become really, really central to our culture and our jobs. It's a very common way to communicate. It's easy, it's quick, it's immediate. But remember, this can be difficult to decipher and the message can get lost. Remember that we cannot rely on nonverbal communication when we are communicating via email and text. We can't hear somebody's tone of voice, we can't see their facial expressions. So it may be very difficult to determine, okay, here's a phrase, but what does it actually mean? Does it mean that you're happy? Does it mean that you're irritated with me? I use the example that, if my husband were to text message me, I love you, and I just respond, me too. He can't see my face. He can't hear my tone of voice. What am I actually communicating? Am I communicating that, yes, I love you too, endlessly? Or I'm still pissed about what happened last night, so I'm just saying me too. I'm not saying I love you back. Right. So email and text message communication can be very inspecific and messages can fail. So you want to keep that in mind to be very as specific as you can. Okay. I want you to know that 90% of all communication is body language. It's notably more than what comes out of our mouth. Our actions, our body language communicates far louder than the words we actually speak. Gestures, facial expressions, your posture, your stance, the tone of voice. What is your body saying? And reading body language becomes really important to law enforcement. So, for example, when you're when you're in a situation, you're communicating with a member of the community, and you're trying to determine, am I going to get compliance here, or might I get a physical reaction? Is this guy going to throw a fist? Is this guy going to run? Right. Well, let's read the body language. And, when you say, sir, I'd like you to step over here, and I, want you to do X, Y, and Z. And he says, okay, officer. But he doesn't step over there. Or he says, okay, officer, and he steps over there, but his fists are clenched and his jaw is clenched. And he seems to have an increase in respiration. He's breathing harder. What's the body language telling you? It doesn't tell you that he's calming down and complying. It tells you that he's gearing up for a fight or a physical altercation, right? So it's really important to read body language as an officer. And remember also that your body language is really important to how you communicate with other people. So when you're approaching a member of the community, if you come at them all heavy and rough and tough, they're going to be more likely to be closed off rather than, excuse me, ma'am, can I ask you a question? Making yourself more approachable, having a lighter tone of voice. You want to be very aware of your body language as well. So, like we've talked about, listen, listen, listen. Listening is a huge problem for people. Everybody's just so busy trying to, come up with their own snappy response. But as an officer, you have to engage in active listening. Active listening is super important. And what does that mean? It means providing your full attention. Don't think about what you're about to say, right? Literally listen, concentrate. A really good practice with active listening is to paraphrase back to the person what they said. So you listen to what they said and you say, okay, so let me just make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. And you summarize your understanding of what they're saying. And this helps clarify communication because either they're going to say, yeah, you got it. That's exactly what I'm saying. Or they're going to say, no, that's not what I mean at all. Right. So we want to actively listen and paraphrase. There are a lot of barriers that interfere with communication. So let's talk about some of those. So the first is literally going to be noise, unwelcome sounds that interrupt communication. Remember, especially line officers, patrol officers, there's all kinds of stuff going on. There's traffic, there's people shouting, there's depending on where you are, there could be a train in the background. There could be, a subway going by. There's a lot of noise that can interrupt communication. Sirens, the radio on your shoulder. It's a lot of things that can interrupt. So be aware of shutting out unwelcome noises. Time, being short on time. None of us are good active listeners when we know we're short on time and we literally have to get going. We're standing there thinking, I got to get out of here. I'm going to be late instead of actively listening. So time can be a barrier. Volume of information. Simply having too much information presented, we all lose some, right? It's called decay. It's called memory decay. If there's a large volume of information, it's not going to necessarily, if I repeat it to you verbally, you're not going to retain it. You might think of communicating that in a different way, like an email where they can refer to it repeatedly. People have the tendency to say what others think we want to hear, right? We tend to tell people what we think they want to hear rather than what we actually mean or what the actual truth is, especially if the truth is negative. Okay, that makes for really, really bad communication. It may be negative, it may be unpleasant to deliver, but you have to deliver it. It's the only way to make sure that communication actually lands. Okay, and sugarcoating or avoiding or dancing around, all that's doing is making communication fail. Failure to select the best word. So words can have multiple meanings. Make sure you're choosing the right ones. And those multiple meanings can break down communication. So make sure, if you have to use a word, maybe, use a different word that doesn't have three meanings. Prejudices for both the sender and the receiver. So we all have preconceived notions and personal biases against race, religion, gender, etc. We all have them. And that immediately tends to shut down communication. So you want to be aware of your biases. And when you are aware of them, okay, that's my bias, or that's something that I'm, just a little sensitive to. When you become aware of it, you realize it's interfering and you're likely to do it less. Okay. Language barriers are a really big issue. Not everybody speaks English, and even for the people who have English as a second language, they don't always speak English well, right? So even though they are communicating with you, they may not be saying what they think they're saying, or they may understand you in a way that you did not mean to be understood because of the language barrier. So keep that in mind. Okay, so let's talk about some internal communication within the agency. So first there's downward communication, which is going to be written or verbal, and it's going to come from supervisors or managers and go down to the line personnel. There's upward communication, which is going to be input and request from line personnel or subordinates up to the administrators. There's horizontal communication, which is going to go from manager to manager. There's subordinate communication, which is managers need to clearly explain and express what they expect out of subordinates so subordinates can deliver. If they don't know what you want, then they can't provide what you want. Grapevine and rumor mills happen in every workplace, and it is just as prevalent in law enforcement agencies as it is anywhere else. And this is just going to be inaccurate information and communication that gets repeated and becomes what people think is truth, but it's not, right? So we always want to avoid the grapevine or the rumor mill. Meetings are another one. This is a common form of communication with a group. I have to say, I personally hate meetings. I don't mind them. If it's really functional and it gets me from point A to point B. But you want to be careful about overdoing it with meetings. Some people have meetings about meetings about meetings, and it's exhausting, and people feel like it's a time waster and that you're not actually able to execute your duties as a result. So make sure your meetings are really succinct in terms of their communication and on point. Remember that technology and communication has changed the field, right? So we have immediate live communication thanks to cell phones, thanks to radios, thanks to 911. And let's move on to tactical communication. Tactical communication is going to occur in very high stress situations where SWAT is called in, whether it's a hostage issue, whether it's a barricaded person, threatening suicide, a mass shooting, etc. It is imperative in these incredibly high stress circumstances to have very clear communication. There's not enough time and there's no do-over in these situations if there's a communication fail and people aren't going where they're supposed to go or doing what they're supposed to do, right? The recent tragedy in Uvalde is a really good example where officers were going back and forth between identifying this as a hostage situation. Now it's a live shooter situation. Well, he stopped shooting. Now it's a hostage situation. Well, which one is it? Because if we keep going back and forth, we can't define the situation and therefore respond to the situation if we can't even define it because we're going back and forth and our communication as to what it can or cannot be. Remember that external communication is important. Communication with external agencies, police work in tandem with EMS, fire departments, other law enforcement agencies, federal law enforcement agencies. So communicating seamlessly and clearly with those agencies is important. Communication with the media is also important, also a double-edged sword. The media can be really helpful in situations like a missing person where they can get information out, they can get pictures out, they can help law enforcement. But the media is also always looking to scoop a good crime story, and they can interfere with an investigation by obtaining and or divulging information that isn't meant for public consumption yet. So you want to be very careful how you communicate with the media. Communication with the community is very important, right? Law enforcement can make great use of social media and the internet to disseminate information to the public about ongoing threats, missing persons, etc. And it's a way to stay in contact with the public, and it's a really easy way for the public to reach out and express their concerns to law enforcement. And finally, I want to talk about conflict because conflict is inherent to law enforcement, and conflict is a method of communication that most people avoid, which, by the way, is deeply unhealthy. I think most people think of conflict as angry and shouting and personal, and we're going to get nasty and hurt each other's feelings. No, it doesn't have to be that way. In fact, good communication via conflict does not result in raised voices and swearing at people and so forth. It doesn't have to be angry or personal, right? You can de-escalate, but you can still be very direct and communicate, a conflicting message or a message that, isn't necessarily a happy message. Without conflict, I would say conflict is actually, it's a really good thing, because without it, problems, get buried, and then they fester and they get bigger, and then they become really big problems when that could have been just a much smaller problem, or a moment of uncomfortableness while we communicate about, yes, this is a problem, yes, this is awkward, okay, but what do we do about it? Let's create a plan so this awkward situation, negative situation, goes away. So if we don't have conflict, and if we don't take it head on, and be very clear and very direct, bigger problems will result. So you need to get very comfortable, as future law enforcement officers and individuals working in law enforcement. You need to get comfortable with conflict, because you're going to deal with it all the time. Okay. It is an important part of communication.